So we got some new Mage cards. No Minion Mage returns, and we got some elemental stuff again as well. But we're going to kick it off with this crazy big spell, the Galactic Projection Orb, a 10 mana spell, arcane, and it will recast a random spell of each cost that you've cast this game and targets enemies if possible. So I had heard some confusion about how this works, but basically as you're playing spells throughout the game at various costs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, etc., this is going to remember the cards that you've played, and it's going to recast those cards. It's not going to be picking a random card that matches that cost. It's going to recast the cards you've been playing throughout the game. The random part here applies to the fact that if you play like 4, 5 cost cards, it's going to pick one of them randomly, not going to recast all 4 of them. So this does allow you to basically build a deck out with spells where you're going to get, fairly reliable results potentially here off the Galactic Projection Orb. And in particular, this targets enemies if possible as well. So you can structure this in ways, perhaps if you build your deck list right, where you have some AoEs early on that wipe out your opponent's board. And then you have single target damage cards that then maybe start going face because they have nothing else to target, right? So you could kind of build a little map here to give this pretty reliable results where it's board clears and probably a bunch of card draw in the mix, maybe some face damage in the mix as well. And hopefully maybe even use it as a pseudo OTK. I doubt you're going to be able to get enough damage out of this. Although, if your opponent's board was empty and you just stacked this with Fireball and Frostbolt and Firelance Portal or something, you might be able to get quite a bit of damage out of it fairly reliably. But it's pretty cool, right? Because it's okay, I've got all these cards in my deck, I'm happy to play, and this one is going to replay all of them and hopefully do some awesome stuff. At the end of this, you could easily end up with a board of your own, your opponent's board empty, some bonus chip damage, probably some cards drawn or value generated as well. Basically just cheating tons of free mana for cards you've already played. And I actually like that. I know that 10 mana is expensive, and I know sometimes that feels prohibitive, but this is the right kind of 10 mana card that does a lot, and it plays to your deck really well. We're also going to see some no minion synergies if your deck has no minions. So, stuffing your deck with the requisite number of spells might actually be something that you kind of want to do anyway. There's going to be a variety of these, as you can see, and they're all at different costs as well. So there are, I think, some pretty cool potentials out of this. Don't forget, we also have Millhouse still in Standard. I know this card hasn't exactly gotten a ton of love. He's been a little slow to play. Let me pull him up here for you. DJ Mana Storm, set the cost of spells in your hand to 0. So you could actually set this to 0. I don't know if you need to do that, but getting a free 8/8 to kick things off might be nice while still perhaps discounting some other crazy big spells in hand as well. So I don't know, man. I actually think this is a pretty cool little pseudo win condition kind of end game bomb. There might also be ways to cheat this out. We've certainly seen some big spell mage synergies in the past. So I wouldn't sleep on this. I think this card's really cool, presents a fun little deck building and kind of gameplay challenge as well, maybe mapping out all of these different costs. So next up, you saw me tease this, YOGG in the box. It's not a Jack in the box, it's a YOGG in the box. This is an 8 mana shadow spell. It casts 5 random spells, and if your deck has no minions, the spells cast cost 5 or more. So basically, at a base, that's pretty bad, right? 5 random, often tiny spells would be a pretty terrible result. You would not want this in a deck with minions, I don't think. This also doesn't have any targets enemies if possible conditionality, so this could just be an absolutely disastrous result. Now, when you do look at spells that cost 5 or more, I think this starts to improve. It still has some shakiness, right? It's still going to be random stuff. There's still going to be a lot of things that kind of don't do anything, or sometimes still, of course, negatively impact you, just, slamming damage into your face. You know, I just like literally just pulled up a random card, right? Like, okay, this is a 5-mana spell. How good is this, right? Okay, so I'm in the highest cost minion for my hand. Might be cool. Deal 5 damage to it. Oh crap, I just killed it, right? Like, I don't have a big enough minion. It's dead. You know, here are some new 7-mana spells in this set. You got a Psychic Scream. Could be good, might be bad if you get minions first, right? Wish Upon a Star. Okay, some free bonus stats, but maybe no kind of immediate impact, right? Crafter's Aura. Actually, probably would be a pretty good result. Okay, I get a 6-drop at the end of my turn. That's maybe not too bad. I'm getting something out of this, right? So it's really just a mixed bag that's super hard to predict. And without some way to like cheat this into play or utilize this as some kind of bonus, some card that synergizes with big spells specifically, I think it's going to be pretty hard to use. Even if you were trying to run a no minion deck and you had all these spells, would YOGG in the Box make the cut? It's, you know, it is an 8-mana spell, so it kind of fills in the gap a little bit on your Galactic Orb or whatever, but does that risk even make it worth it? I don't know. I think this one's pretty shaky. I think the inconsistency here is tough. It definitely depends on the spell pool a little bit, so it actually might start better with a smaller spell pool right after rotation and kind of get worse as more cards get introduced. Sometimes it could get better if the quality or the kind of proactive nature of those cards increases, but often I think it would get worse because the consistency goes down. There's just more random super synergistic stuff that doesn't really contribute very well. So I love the fun of this. Like, obviously sounds super fun, but definitely not good at a base, and in the no minion deck I still think actually looks kind of shaky. Moving on though, the Manufacturing Error. This actually looks pretty sick. 6-mana spell, draw 3 cards. If your deck has no minions, they cost 3 less, which if you squint really closely, that looks a little bit like a Skull of Gul'dan, which we know has historically been a pretty nutty sort of card. I hate expensive card draw like this in some ways, but there are certainly decks and classes that can get away with it. And the fact that you're getting this mana cheat back is really going to help. So, you know, you'd hate to spend 6 to just draw, typically in a Mage deck, but getting 9 mana cheat out of it, some of that means you're going to be able to play like right away if you get a couple cheap cards, which could, you know, help you recover the tempo you've already sacrificed as you play this for 6. But more notably too, like a catch-up turn next turn, you know, you get another 6-cost card that costs 3. You get a 10-drop that you can suddenly play on turn 7. You know, those sorts of things become way more interesting, allowing you to cheat that mana back and kind of net while still drawing a bunch of resources. This is also kind of cool in your Galactic Orb as well, because you could very often get some 0-mana cards to play after an orb. Like your orb is going to play this for your 6 cost probably, and then you just get like, you know, a couple things that are now 0. It's another follow-up, maybe more damage, whatever it is, becomes possible. So I do think this actually looks like the best no minion card, and perhaps the reason even to kind of run this deck, unlike the YOGG box. So next up is Spot the Difference, 4-mana spell. This one allows you to discover a 3-cost minion to summon, and then if your deck has no minions, you get to repeat this. So basically a couple random 3-drops put into play, which means no battle cries, but could have other positive effects. Because you're getting to discover these, you're kind of nudging the quality of the summon. So that means you can, on average, get slightly higher stats. So you might be getting, you know, 3 4s on average instead of getting like 3 3s or smaller on average if it were truly random. And then you also might be getting some death rattles or things that impact the game on board, rush minions, that sort of stuff. Little bonuses here and there, which do make this a little better and probably help it feel solid. I think it's actually pretty okay because of that discover, you know, adding that additional nuance and extra quality to this card. It's also sometimes just important for these no minion decks to have ways to actually make minions and get stuff out on board. So even if this isn't the most exciting payoff, it probably feels like a necessary inclusion in a no minion deck, and I think it's okay. So next up, another mage spell. This is Hidden Objects, 2 mana, discover a secret and set its cost to 1. So that's in total, of course, a 3 mana commitment to a secret, which is what they cost. But this does offer you a nice little bit of flexibility in that you can kind of choose a secret that fits the right moment. You can also, of course, bank a discounted secret for later for the right moment as well. So, you know, invest my 2 now, and then I get a cheap secret to weave into a turn later, maybe alongside a minion I want to protect or some other sort of play I've I've committed to the secret's going to help. I have a counter spell out now to protect my big threat, that sort of thing. Might be harder to do with a full 3-cost counter spell, which is kind of cool. I like that flexibility. The downside here right now is that the secret pool for Mage sucks. It is bad. It has a bunch of new secrets lately that are just like random value generation garbage. I'd say the good one is Counterspell. There's also Explosive Runes, which is sometimes pretty solid, and Ice Barrier on occasion can be a good fit. But ultimately, I think 3 out of the really, even Ice Barrier is often bad. So probably 3 out of the 5 secrets currently in standard might not really be all that useful. Objection was the home run that just rotated out as well. So feels kind of bad right now in the secret pool. So I don't know. I don't think this gets played right now just because the secret pool is so bad. You don't hit counterspell every time off this, so you're probably not super happy. As more secrets get added, maybe this is something that gets revisited, but also we just need cards for no minion decks right now. And if there's not enough spells in the pool that make sense, this might actually still make the cut in a no minion deck just because there's not enough else to work with currently in a 4-set meta fresh after rotation. So moving on to some of the elemental stuff that Mage got. I actually like this card quite a bit. The 5-mana Sleet Skater is a 3/4 elemental. Miniaturize, Battlecry, freeze an enemy minion, and then gain armor equal to its attack. And that actually seems pretty useful to me. A nice little stall here sometimes for, mid-sized, mid-game threats. Sometimes we get big 5/5. Sometimes people cheating 8/8s and stuff into play early. This could easily lock up a minion kind of banked until you find removal for it later, or just stalled until you try to win the game yourself by killing the opponent, both of which can be useful. And then that bonus armor just gives you that, extra little bit of survivability, that extra time to work with. And then Sleet Skater, you get to do the same thing next turn. So you get to lock up the same crazy threat 2 turns in a row, or maybe just save it for later in a pinch. If there's something even bigger expected to come down later, gain even more armor. So I think this adds a ton of survivability. I've always liked freeze effects when they're individual as a mechanic. I hate freeze when it's wide board. That always gets super frustrating. But the fact that this is giving you some bonus survivability on top of that seems like a pretty high utility card for me. I think this actually looks really rather nice. Quite nice tool that could be played in elemental decks, number one, but also has plenty of independent utility. Just like grindy control decks, Reno decks could love a Sleet Skater. I think this looks cool. Pun intended, perhaps. Moving on, this is cool too. The Watercolor Artist, a 4-mana 4/4 elemental. Battlecry, draw a frost spell, and at the start of your turns, plural, reduce its cost by 1. So that means every single turn that card is going to keep getting cheaper. It is basically melting, I guess, since it's a frost spell. And the Watercolor Artist does not need to be alive for that, because this is a Battlecry that's going to be an enchantment applied to the card drawn. So you just play your Watercolor Artist, you draw, nice little tutor here for a frost spell. That's awesome. And then you get it cheaper. And if you have a high value, high cost frost spell, wait a couple turns, you might be able to do something crazy, or just even a cheap little, throwaway frost spell. Just make it 0 mana in no time. And that could become a useful little asset or tool as well. So this looks nice to me, man. I like that both of these elementals are independently useful. In other words, they're just cards that work, which can still benefit an elemental deck, but they don't have that like hyper synergistic elemental check where you have to have all of your elementals played and stuff. They're just kind of good cards that like Reno mages would love to play, and then might also support elementals as well. It's not all in on that elemental thing, which feels nice. Moving on is the Frost Lich Cross Stitch. Of course, a reference to Frost Lich Jaina here, although one key thing is missing. This card doesn't have any lifesteal. I wish it had some lifesteal. This is a 5-mana frost spell. Deal 4 damage to a character. If it dies, summon a 3/6 water elemental that freezes. That's what the Frost Lich Jaina hero card would do, with 1 damage, of course. But she also gave your elementals lifesteal. I wish this elemental got lifesteal, or maybe the card itself had lifesteal, just something that harkened to that. And I think that would give this card a little bit of a bonus edge that it needs, because right now I'm not convinced I love this all that much. It is swingy, which is cool, just clean something up and summon a 3/6 probably an okay play on turn 5, kill a 4/4 and get a body down. It's some reason it just doesn't feel that modern to me. It feels a little too honest, a little bit too straightforward, but I like the flexibility that can also go face. So if you're ahead, you still, you know, have some value basically on this 4 damage. It's not going to feel efficient from a reach standpoint very often. Probably also doesn't exactly feel like the best payoff for the watercolor artist. It's like on curve, it's not exactly perfect. You know, if this were like 6 mana and did more damage or something, it would kind of make sense for this on 4. And then it gets reduced to 5 instead of getting reduced to 4. You know, just a little clunkiness with that sort of combo, but that's not, you know, it doesn't have to match up perfectly. So I don't know, this is, I think it's, again, fine. It's just maybe a little too honest for this era of Hearthstone to feel really compelling. Moving on to the Triple Wick Trickster, a new 4 mana 2/3 elemental. Battle Cry, deal 2 damage to a random enemy 3 times. So really juggling some flame here. This card's, you know, it's kind of high output in theory. It's like, oh, 6 damage, that could go face, and this is a fireball on a stick. Wow, but it's really not, right? It's very often going to be pretty bad damage that hits, you know, oh great, I hit 2 3/3s and I did nothing, and I only summoned a 2/3 minion. I think there are going to be plenty of instances where it just feels like this is too random and whiffs too hard, and the damage breakpoints don't necessarily make sense. Without that kind of soft targeting that, say, Demon Hunter cards often have, hitting the lowest health enemy, those sorts of things, that can help increase those cards' predictability and reliability, because you get to kind of control them in some ways. You get to influence how the turn's going to play out. You kind of understand it. But for 4 mana, this is a pretty big commitment for a result that's really unreliable. If the base stats here were higher, you could probably take that hit and just kind of hope for the best and say, hey, I'm getting a decent body out of this no matter what. But as a 2/3, I think it's just too small for that. I think most actually going to say this is not worth the risk. The occasion where this does do the face damage, okay, cool. But was the 2/3 bonus worth it over literally just running a fireball, that sort of thing, right? I don't think so. I think this feels just a bit too small and a bit too random to be good. All right, so now let's do some quick reviews. The Galactic Projection Orb is a 4-star card. YOGG in the Box is a 2-star card. Manufacturing Error is a 4-star card. Spot the Difference is a 3-star card. Hidden Objects is a 3-star card. Sleet Skater is a 4-star card. Watercolor Artist is a 4-star card. Frost Lich Cross Stitch is a 2-star card. Triple Wick Trickster is a 1-star card. And there you go, kind of a cool little mage set. It doesn't feel like the most powerful stuff, but I don't know, there's some hooks here. I think the Projection Orb people might be sleeping on a little bit. This looks kind of cool to me. Some kind of no minion mage deck coming together, it seems totally possible. So I'm actually fairly excited to play this stuff. Mix it all up together in a Reno deck too with some of this elemental. Sounds cool. So share your thoughts on these cards down below. Thanks much as always for watching. Stay tuned for the couple final reviews. I think we only have like 2 left, so we're getting there. But yeah, thanks. And until next time, game on.